Hello, good morning. Welcome to this session. Feels very early in the morning, so thank you so much for getting up and being here. Lovely to see your faces on day 2 of this wonderful conference, and thank you for choosing to come here as well, because there's so many other places that you could be. So we thought we would just like to do a minute's pause, just because it feels it's fairly busy. One of our speakers has just arrived, so just a minute pause, just so that we can all arrive in the room together. Great, thank you. So my name is Rachel Fleming, and I'm the co-founder of an organisation called the Animate Earth Collective. We're a group of mythologists, writers, activists, ceremonialists, many other things, exploring how we as humans can develop a much deeper and reciprocal relationship with nature. And we've been working with the conference this year to look at how the old land-based spiritualities and wisdom traditions of the British Isles and around the world can really inform the work with and the way we steward the land in contemporary ways. So this is our 3rd event at the conference. We had a session yesterday on belonging to places, and we ran a ceremony last night. And this is our 3rd one, and we are talking about conversation with the land. We are asking the question, is it possible to communicate directly with the land, with the forces and flows and cycles and the other than human beings within it? Is it possible to include the voice of place, the voice of land in our decision making? And if we did, would we be better stewards? Would we be better able to produce food and do our work more harmoniously with the rest of nature? So we are putting this question to our wonderful panel. And on our panel, we have people who use direct communication with the land for their growing and food producing work. We have a couple of people who practice direct communication with the land, and we have a couple of farmers who also use this work in what they do. So, apologies, I'm using many pages of notes. We have Patrick MacManaway, who is otherwise known as the Land Whisperer, and who I'm sure some of you will have seen at the conference last year. He is 3rd generation practitioner of psychic and healing arts, working around the world with farmers for nearly 30 years, if I'm making that calculation correctly, Patrick. We have Adam Brocklehurst, Brock, who has a 40-acre biodynamic farm in North Somerset, producing pork and lamb and beef. We have Bríd Walsh, who is also 3rd generation, or something about 3rd generations, holding a gift for communicating with land and trees, and holding the fabulous job title of intermediary for the land, which I think is a fabulous job description, at 42 acres in Somerset. And then we have Richard Gantlett, who is a biodynamic farmer, with a farm near Avebury, working with soil, cows, cereal crops and agroforestry. And if I've got any of that wrong, then please do correct me when you speak. So we are starting with our first question, and we have called this session the Common Wild Tongue, because we are using this expression, the common wild tongue, as an idea actually that I've borrowed from the Romany gypsy tradition of this country, that there is a wild tongue of nature that the rest of nature, well, all of nature speaks and understands, that somehow we as humans have forgotten. So we are using this really to start our conversation on communication with the land, and asking each of our panellists what the common wild tongue of nature means to them. So, Bríd, as you're closest to me, would you like to butt up? And it's a huge subject. We've got 90 minutes, so we'll hurtle through it. And after about an hour, we'll also bring in you and hear questions and comments from you. So, Bríd, the common wild tongue. Does that mean anything to you?
Yeah, it's a great title. Thank you, everybody, for coming, and the people online as well for showing up. The common wild tongue, I suppose it's almost like, for me, the way I would answer that question, Rachel, is it's we have a language or a sensitivity where we communicate with the spaces that are unseen, or spaces that we perceive that there is nothing in the space. We see each other as physical vessels. We see trees, we see land. We live in a physical environment, but there's a lot more happening in that space than I think is spoken about. It used to be spoken about, and certainly oral traditions in Ireland, where I'm from, would lend itself to the sharing of those experiences and the capacities to communicate with the other that we're sharing space with. Trees and the land, like everything's here a lot longer before we arrive and after we've transitioned, if you like. So for me, the common wild tongue talks about a communication that's available in the space with the land and the trees and all beings, really. It's so I hope that answers my understanding.
Yeah. Brilliant, thank you. Patrick, may I come to you next? A common wild tongue.
Speak about physics here, yes. Good morning. Common wild tongue, I think, is the most lovely poetic description of something that we all, in fact, experience, but perhaps don't language or acknowledge or talk about. And in terms of forgetting the common wild tongue, I think perhaps what we've forgotten is that we are already speaking it. And what we forget is that nature can hear our every thought and responds directly to it. Our thoughts, we can think of this in poetic terms, we can also think of it in rationalistic, scientific terms. I'm sure all of us have experienced intimate telepathic communication with companion animals. Perhaps shared thoughts, telepathic communications with close friends, whether they're in present space with us or at a distance. We think about somebody and they call us out of the blue, for example. So we know that there is a non-verbal but literally specific communication that is not requiring of spoken language, but is based on our our thoughts and intentions. Poetically, I love the Aboriginal Australian notion of the dreaming, which is a shared astral space in which all communications are present and in which we participate. In terms of rational physics, our thoughts and our feelings are easily measured as electromagnetic waves. And all things that have physical form first have to have an electromagnetic body. A stable electromagnetic space is required for your physical presence to be. And that's conveniently created for us by the beating of our heart. Creates a vibrational space in which we can tune the radio set of our mind to any frequency that we choose. Plato tells us that the gods are numbers, and in this regard, the numbers are the numbers on the dial, the frequency of the wavelengths that we tune into. When we look at that, I guess my job here is to speak about telluric currents rather than dragons. So just the rational aspect of this, we can literally measure the frequency of our meditative thought, of our cognitive thought, and what we find is that those same frequencies are shared by plants and animals. So you may have heard of the theta frequency, which is a deep meditation. That's where you can talk to elementals. We can measure that happening in water. We can measure that happening in soil. If you want to speak to mycorrhizal fungi, you just tune into mycorrhizal fungi. Animals, plants, you're going to find also moving up into alpha, which is the next frequency up, which is a sort of gardening frequency. It's the relaxed but conscious frequency that we get into when we're gardening or doing simple repetitive manual tasks around the farm. And then our beta consciousness is more linear, cognitive. Most of the nature spirits do not come up into high beta, and that's where the disconnection happens. Because if we're in analytical thought, we take our frequency set out of the animal and plant and elemental zone. So by moving into observational mind, we drop back down into the alpha and theta frequencies, where we naturally and inevitably are connected with the plants and animals around us. So there's a very simple and observational and measurable science to this. Very inexpensively, you can buy software for your computer and check out where your brain's at in biofeedback loops, and then experiment communicating with your animals and plants. Just a couple more things while I've got the space to introduce this. So all electromagnetic waves move at the same speed, whether they're sunlight, whether they're microwaves that run your cell phone, whether it's the radio or the television frequency. They're all waves moving through the electromagnetic medium, what Plato would have called the ether. And our thoughts are at the bottom end of that frequency. They're in the extremely long wave, ELF or VLF, extremely or very long frequency. Now, the reason I'm mentioning this, two things. There's a planetary frequency that is literally the primary resonance of the Earth, 7.83 waves per second, the so-called Schumann frequency. That is the exact midpoint of the 4 octaves of our consciousness. So just like an orchestra tuned to an A440 of the first violin, our consciousness is absolutely attuned to planetary frequency. So is all other biological life. So 7.83 waves per second, so-called Schumann frequency. As with all natural phenomena, it's been identified as belonging to somebody who spotted it first. God got copyright on all our best ideas, but nonetheless, that one. So, two things with this. We are naturally attuned, as is all other biological life, to the same primary frequency. So we're all inevitably in the same orchestra. And the other thing to say is that, as we know, microwave is quite a short wave, and it doesn't bend around hills. That's why you have to have all cell towers horizontally intervisible. If you're in a cell phone shadow, because the microwave only moves in a straight line, you lose reception. Long waves don't do that. Long waves bend around. And so 7.83 is the standing wave that goes all the way around the planet. It's a planetary standing wave. It's that long. And that's the midpoint of our consciousness, which means that whatever you think, you're literally putting into a planetary standing wave. So this is global. So not only are your thoughts locally perceived, they're instantly globally present as a vibrational resonance in the whole of our biosphere. And so in that way, you can be a thought, or you can be a very long frequency wave. You can be a dragon or a Birkeland current. But in terms of the analytical science of it, this is very simple. It's well recognized. Everything communicates on a frequency basis. The sacred canon of number, which is universal, is the musical scale. And so we're all literally, as with metaphor, singing together in celebration in the same choir. And our nature is of that. So we are already speaking the common wild tongue, and we just need to remember that everybody's speaking the same vibrational telepathic language, and they can hear you whether you notice it or not.
And extremely long frequency, ELF, elf. Right? We're all elf. Yeah.
You spotted us.
Change my shoes.
I can see you breathe that.
Thank you, Patrick, and we'll come back to that. That's already blown my mind, and I'm kind of haven't had quite enough coffee for it yet. Before we just go on to Brooke and Richard, Bríd, can I come back to you?
As somebody that's working then with what we might call the common wild tongue, how does what Patrick says kind of feel to you? It feels to me yours is a very direct communication that you've had as a gift kind of in this life. Does that feel right to you? Is that kind of how you would understand it as well?
I mean, for me, to tell you the truth, Patrick has the vocabulary and is able to project into the human mind the concepts and the understandings. So he's able to language it, I suppose, which is why I love listening to him. But he's able to language my experience in the world. And the more time I spend with Patrick, the more language and vocabulary I'm able to use as well and share and create a picture for people with an understanding of how my life experience is or has been, you know. So thank you, Patrick, for you know, the language and naming that space, you know.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Richard, may I come to you next, because you have had Patrick working on your land. I would love to know how that is for you and what your understanding of the common wild tongue has become because of it, or your own understandings of the common wild tongue.
I'm going to stand if you'll excuse me.
Yeah, for
sure. I perhaps think better on my feet. I'm going to perhaps tell you a story of how I came to sit here, and that's probably the best introduction. So I was a conventional farmer in the 1990s, and we started organic conversion in 1998, and that really felt like not doing the nasty stuff, not spraying pesticides, not putting the agricultural artificial fertilizers on. And so it's about not doing stuff, and I knew that our soil was degraded, and we wanted to repair and enhance it, and that's really what all this is about. We have a Neolithic farm site very next door to us, and that got me thinking then, why did people settle near us at Avebury and Windmill Hill near Avebury next door? And there must be some other things, some wisdom, ancient wisdom that we could tap into, to tune into. And I came across a book called Secrets of the Soil by Tompkins and Byrd, which some of you may have read, and if you haven't, I recommend it. And in that, there's a chapter by a lovely man who came to be a good friend, Alex Podlinski. And he was a biodynamic farmer in Australia, and he died a few years ago, sadly. But he has inspired everything we do on the farm, really. And but by chance, my sister, who's Australian, I told her about this chapter in the book, and she went back to Australia, rang him up and said, oh, my brother's really interested. And he said, oh, I'm going to France in June. Why don't we meet up? Anyway, so I spent a week going around vineyards and farms in France with him. And it was just astounding seeing biodynamic. They're all biodynamic farms, by the way. But often in vineyard, you see a hillside covered in vines, and you think it's one vineyard, and it normally isn't. There were vineyards or vines where you'd have an organic one next to a biodynamic one, next to a conventional one. And you could just see the life in the plants and the soil in the biodynamic one compared to the other two. And it sort of just slightly blew me away, and I thought, well, I want to go back and farm like that. I want my plants to have this biodynamic plant expression. And that really started me on this journey of communicating with nature, if you like. And so we stopped conventionally farming, we started biodynamic farming, and that really had to be the start, because conventionally farming, I feel we weren't anywhere in a wild space. We were switching the plants off to their connection with nature by injecting them with jugs, if you like. And so we needed to remove that and repair and enhance, I keep talking about, in this biodynamic way, in order to wake the plants up, for them to interact with each other. There's a lovely slide when I'm lecturing, which is another job I do at University of Reading, which I show often where we've got a conventional farm next door of a conventional field of wheat and a field of our wheat. And photographs often aren't good in demonstrating these things, but it's so obvious in these two photographs where the wheat on the neighbour's farm is, individual bodybuilders, is the best way to describe it. And the photograph of our field of wheat, which is unified, it's one. And I don't say that, but any audience I've shared that with, the audience comes to that conclusion themselves. And I always find it rather lovely, and I was always reluctant to do this initially, because I thought, no one's going to see the nuances in the photos. But it's amazing how they do. And so it sort of becomes obvious. And so Alex was very much a practical farmer, and his approach in the 70s got him notoriety in Australia, and he was on TV in Australia. There was more biodynamic land in Australia than there was organic land on the rest of the planet at that time. And so he really had a great way of getting across the practicalness to farmers and showing that the soil really does change when you use these techniques. And that's really what it's all about livening the soil. And then you get lively plants. Of course, the plants have to enliven the soil too, but I won't go into those details now. But so once we'd got the farm awake and plants living properly, then I happened to come across Patrick. Also through my sister in Australia, I think it was. So a good connection. She's probably listening actually at the moment. So, and so yes, so then we were able to work on different levels and communicate as Patrick talks about. So much more directly, and that has really helped bring the farm together as one whole farm, as you do as a biodynamic farm, to work as one unit, both of the insects and the mycorrhizal fungi, and the pests and the predators that have form a good balance in our crops, and so there's a harmony, I think, which is what it results. And for me, as I mentioned yesterday, for anyone who was listening to me speak yesterday, it's about balance and creating a balance in nature, working with nature, and for me, if we can have nature, or us be on nature's team, as it were, then actually it makes farming much easier. And I'm all about making my job much easier. We look after quite a bit of land, and if we can have that communication fluid and intuitional, we're going to talk about a little more about that later, perhaps. Then it just makes the farming flow and easier, really. Sorry, thank you. Sit down.
So what would you say, Richard, is the one thing, if you could say one thing, has helped then with your kind of balance and harmony and unified crop?
There isn't one thing. So it's a collection of things, and it's a process, and that, and it's not over. I'm hoping to learn other things and develop other techniques and bring other factors in. So it's an ongoing, life is a building up process, isn't it? You never reach it. There's always something to add, and there's always something to build up, and you mustn't let go, because then it collapses. So it's never work done. So it's a process, as I've said, and it has to start by stop doing the toxic stuff. I don't think it's possible without that, personally. And then you get the plants become much more receptive and connected with the soil, and in tune with each other. It's just a simple biological process of how the fungi connect life, and that happens all around the planet. So
it's more of holding an intention for balance somehow. Maybe, perhaps. Thank you. Brock, common wild tongue. Yes, apologies. We've got one roving mic.
So, can you hear me?
Yes.
That's 3 very hard acts to follow. I'm just new here. But I met a common wild tongue on my way, because the River Thames is knee-deep, so that was quite fun. Well, for language, I guess if I begin with language, so if we break it down, it's basically a measure of the tongue. And for me, I kind of see the process is about the vibrations that we create. So it's very easy to create deceptive words that obviously come out in an intellectual way that will feed people's desires, maybe. But it is the vibration, it's the intention behind it, and that lands a great responsibility with everybody, because it's up to you to do it. If you can't communicate in the wild tongue, it's very difficult to be in a space where you don't kind of want your cows to have more calves. But it's about acceptance, I think. So sitting with us and how we view the world, there's a bit of work that I'm kind of involved in at the moment, or have been researching, which was introduced to me by somebody else, but it was the kind of smallest kind of life forms on the planet, which I think they call prokaryotes. There's a lot of them. There's like billions of the things. I think there's approximately 1 million in a milliliter of water. Apparently, somebody counted them. Well done. And it would seem that these have no really will or intention. They're very much at the mercy of the world, and yet they seem to be the fabric of the world at the same time. And I'm beginning to kind of feel into the fact that this is where us and the physical meet. Us meets the physical, which then meets the etheric, which is the world around us, which isn't physical. So I guess it would be good to introduce that idea, is that around us we are in a sea of nitrogen with oxygen and other gases floating around. And it's within those voids is where the elemental world exists. And it is a world which is fabricated out of our feelings and our thoughts and our intentions. They are what the elemental world used to work with to create the physical fabric of the world that we can see. Where there is an object, like a table, there, as far as I can decipher, there is a void in the elemental world, and they tend it. So they're looking after it. They've committed themselves out of their space and into the physical world, and then we've got a solid table. So for us, we look at all the physical things. I suppose if you look at a solid physical object, really the qualities of it are what is beyond it, in a way. You know, it's like if this was still the tree, you wouldn't see the quality of the table. You just have a huge lump of wood. But obviously we've cut it away and we've created a void around it, and this is the qualities of the table are what we see outside of it, which is contained in the elemental world. And so, yeah, it's really the thing that I work with the most is this idea of the care and attention that needs to be held and taken with the work and the common wild tongue is this kind of is this river of our emotions and things that are around us for which we are entirely responsible. And I suppose that is where I kind of met the biodynamics. I've been involved in conventional farming because that's what all the farmers that I got involved with did. And it was in varying degrees. There was even people who were kind of what you might call on peasant farming level, but they still went and got their little bottle of Roundup or whatever they were using for ease here and a sheep dip there and a whatever. You know, it just creeps in. But I think the whole ethos of this way of working with the land is based on a battle or a war, and the intentions are then not the intention of healing and love. And it may be that we find that in our whole world. You know, the way that our society is created and structured is based on hierarchy and control and war. And it kind of initiates that inside us. So we feel frustrated or overbeared, or we join in with gusto. But I think each time that we engage ourselves in these practices, then we're not holding the responsibility for the vibrations that are around us and how we feed the elemental world with our thoughts and emotions and etc. Yeah, it's like a really simple thing, but it's a bugger to unravel. I think that's... Yeah.
Cool. So it is So it feels as though we all feel, and I'm sure there will be many in the room that feel that there is a common wild tongue, but it's just really interesting in the different explanations that we probably all have for it. The prokaryotes and the elemental world, or the frequencies and vibrations, or whether it's a very practical just way of working with the land or an experience. There's so many different explanations for this thing. I'm interested now in how we participate in it then. Whatever the explanation we have for it, how do we participate in it? Patrick, if I can come to you first on that.
So, for me, the how-to, first, as I said, you can't switch this off. So, like it or not, it's already happening. So, very much as Brock was saying, the art is to come to a point of self-awareness and take account of what you're generating. And so the how-to for me is very, very simple. Again, if I somehow got the slot on the physics side, so I'm going to speak to that part, even though I think, yeah, no, I got that slot. My experience is what Bríd says. It's you just do it and it happens. So, but so brain as radio, it already comes preloaded, automatic, all the preset frequencies, and so what happens is literally whatever you think about, you naturally phase in train with. So if I think about the table, my resonance automatically shifts to the same resonance as the table. If I think about cow, automatically that happens. So you don't have to think about it. You just have to think about the thing that you want to connect and communicate with. And that establishes a communications rapport. Again, exactly as Brock was saying, what quality then of exchange, what tonal quality of vibration are you establishing? So my practices always start by becoming very peaceful and centered. Because busy mind is just noise, chatter, and background noise, and gets in the way of clear communications signal experience. So first thing is get centered, get present, get into your heart. And don't proceed until you're there. You want to be peaceful and heart-centered, otherwise you just get feedback loops and noise and chatter and incoherence. So center, presence, and get into heart. And then we just bring into mind, clearly and specifically, whatever it is that we wish or need to communicate with. And then we send love and gratitude to that until we feel an establishment of a love and rapport presencing, and then once we have that sense of love and peace and rapport and gratitude, then we can have any conversation that we need. And in terms of what you think about, that depends on task. So with, as we know, with elemental nature, spirits, plants and animals, and exactly as Richard was saying, you can either communicate with an individual or you can communicate with a collective consciousness. So you may want to speak to a particular cow, or you may want to communicate with the collective consciousness of the herd entirely. You may want to speak to a particular paddock, or you may want to speak to the farm. You may need to have a serious conversation with one tomato plant, or you may be talking to, a whole crop. So process then is center, peaceful, into the heart, hold whatever it is that you desire to communicate with love, with gratitude, until you feel a rapport there. And then we need to make sure that we have a dialogue. And so we express whatever our concern is, if we have a question, or if we've got an idea that we want to run by the field or the crop. So we share our thought, and then we listen for response. And the sharing of the thought and the listening response can be single sensory or multisensory. So one old languaging of this is that it's a psychic practice. And within that, there's clairvoyance, where we're exchanging internal imaginal images. We're projecting an image, and then we're opening our mind to see what images form as a communication in response. Or sometimes as a clairaudience, where we kind of articulate as though we were speaking, and then listen to hear an inner voice speaking back to us. So we've got clairvoyance, clairaudience, clairsentience, where we express a feeling that's very felt, and then the response come back as whether we feel good about that or whether we feel uneasy about that. So we get the dialogue in sort of body sensation. Or then there's claircognizance, which is just an inner knowing, a sure and certain knowing that just arises. So because it's a vibrational communication, our sensory mechanism perceives the vibration, and then we interpret it in whatever our personal path of ease is. So some of us are naturally clairsentient, some of us more naturally clairvoyant. Often it comes as a mix of many things. But we want to have it be an exchange of communications. And so we want to patiently communicate and then listen. And I think part of the art is being peaceful enough to recognize that the response that we get is a response rather than just our own next thought. So there's a sort of deep listening or patience. It's not a hearing, it's a listening, as it were. So they speak into our mind, they speak into our body. It's a vibrational communication, and the art is to notice what they're saying rather than just our own next thought. So there's a peacefulness that's required, love and gratitude to create rapport and respect and harmony, and then once that's established, we can have any chat that we want. Often the chats are very simple, often the chats are very quick. It's sort of, hello, good morning, how are you? Fine, see you later. There you go. That was the chat today. Or it may be, you get a communication about timing of planting, or something to do with nutritional health, or something to do with biodynamics, or maybe the cows are telling you that they need to move the pasture, or maybe the pasture's telling you need to move the cows. This is the same as our intuition and instinct. So another way of saying claircognizance is it's a gut instinct. So there's lots of words to mean the same thing. But trusting instinct, trusting intuition, trusting the thought that comes into your head. And sometimes when we communicate, we may be preoccupied, we may have a busy mind, we may not be able to hear clearly what comes back at the time, but having asked the question, they'll get the answer back to you. So it may come in the dream that you have that night, or it may come to you later on when you've finished your day and you finally sit down and relax and let go of it, and then all of a sudden the answer comes. So we don't want to be impatient, we don't want to be forcing of this process. As we do it and as we see results of benefit, then we start to relax into a trusting of the process. Literally, in my mind, the only things that I regret ever are when I haven't followed my instinct and intuition. If I follow them in all of my life, instinct and intuition, if I follow that, it all goes well, whether that's linearly rational or not. Only time I regret an action or a behavior is when I didn't follow my instinct or intuition. And I've observed that long enough now that it's really my bad if I don't do that. There's no question about it. I know that the intuition is always true and always right. And so but we find that trust as we practice it, I think.
So, Patrick, you're the third generation of doing this work. Is this something that we can all, well, I'm hoping it is something that we can all do with a bit of kind of encouragement.
Absolutely. No, I just got lucky, and this was how life happened. So if we get trained into linear thought, but it's a remembering, because I truly believe this is the most natural thing in the world.
Yeah.
And it's really just a relaxing into a hot bath to let go of any thoughts that are contradictory to this. And I'm sure everybody in the audience, if this is true, you know it. And if this is true, you've all experienced it many times. It's just really a question of giving it priority space in your consciousness. But it's a relaxing into the most natural thing. It's not something we're reaching out to do or something we have to learn at all. We're relaxing into our most natural state, which is an instinctive, intuitive relationship and rapport with everything that we're around us. And whatever we engage our focus on, we get that rapport, and just make sure that you've got a love and gratitude and respect tone before proceeding into actual specific communications.
Brilliant, thank you, Patrick. So can I check with you, Bríd? So it's more simple than we tend to think. You know, it feels like it's a great big communicating with the land, a great big complicated process. Patrick, relaxing into a hot bath, is that the way you experience it?
Or a cold bath, I suppose, would be an option. Yeah, I mean, I you know, everything that Patrick says, I agree with. It is simple, and you know, I use this phrase quite a lot, so those of you who know me will be bored, but stay in your own lane is one of the phrases that I use regularly in my work. And so when we get quiet, get soft, drop into our hearts, create a space in our physical vessel, we can connect with a frequency that Patrick talked about, the frequency of oneness, the frequency of wholeness, and we can sit in, for me, that's how I sit in that space. And the mind gets busy, the chatter, the monkey mind, the judgment, the criticism, all of those spaces get really loud initially in that quiet space. But then they kind of run out of steam because they're not real. The chatter, the monkey mind, all of those belief systems, the conditioning, that's not a real space. That's conditioning. When we're in a true, real space, it's soft, it's quiet. It's almost like nothingness, yet it's everything that's real. So patience is a good word, Patrick. That's definitely been a practice of mine. So, for example, my own personal experience I'd like to share with you last year from January until November, just in 2023, I did a full practice every day on self-judgment. How could that be true? Does anybody can relate to the chatter? And it's like once you get to know your own system and your own patterning, you can put it aside and, put it in the passenger seat, and you do the driving from the connected place. And I also have had experiences in my life where I have not followed the intuition. I have not followed the guidance. I have not followed and when I see Google Maps driving on the 303 to 42 acres every week, and I hear go left, and I'm looking at the thing going, there's nothing on the road. And it's like, go left, go left. Then 10 minutes later, there's been something's happened that would have become a roadblock for me, for example. So the quiet space is the place to be.
And in terms of conversation and doing, it's okay to kind of receive guidance, but then how to know what to then do. Like I've heard Patrick say, you have a conversation and you ask.
So I also ask, and I sit with the question. It's really simple. Show me what's next. Show me what's next, because it's like once we take a next step with our intuition, which is really, intuition is really a communication with a bigger space, the one space of consciousness. If I were to say, show me what's next, and do the next action, the energetic spaces has realigned. So then I say, what's next in the next piece? So we're the building blocks are from the place of intuition, rather than my mind needs to know what it's going to look like at the end of the week. That's not my business. My business is to know what's the next step. And it may not look like my mental body perceives it, because that's a projection from a limited space of my humanity, if you like, rather than an expanded space of consciousness. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
So I would love to move to the farmers then, who work in this kind of way, really to understand what impact this kind of working is having, kind of what you're witnessing by doing this kind of work. I'd love to move to questions in about 10 minutes, something like that. So if I come to you, Brock, and then to Richard, and then if we open it up, what impacts are you seeing? Kind of how are you working it, and what impacts are you seeing?
How are you working it? Well, from one angle, we work it with the human perspective. So we have quite an active and vibrant community working in the gardens at the farm. Approximately 3 acres. There's veg, and we grow small-scale crops. It's a small farm, so the crops are in the garden. So normally like half an acre of something. One of the practices that we use is that when we meet in the morning, so we meet on a Friday morning, and we have a meeting circle at the beginning of the day. And its format is that you sit there to witness each other. So basically we sit in a circle and you just let the shit out. Whatever's been going on for the week or for the day. In fact, we have people come who just want to come and sit in a circle. And there's no judgment.
Yeah.
There's no comment. it's none of your business what anybody else is saying. You are just there to witness them. And you honour that. And what I have found over the last few years of us doing this is that we regulate each other into this common kind of vibration, in a way. And in a way, that practice is the same. So biodynamics is, if you do it, you'll understand it. If you don't do it, it's full of mystery and weird stuff and cow's horns and mesenteries and bladders and stuff. But as I've practiced doing these, and I've been doing it for about 15 years now, is what I've discovered, or what's unravelled for me, is that what Steiner left us with was preparations, and they're preparing us. They're not. They are magical properties, and I mean, in the world of science, they make a huge amount of sense. It's all about the transforming of light into matter, and the qualities of how that happens. So this is what they are for. But actually, the guiding light is us. The alchemist is the person, and each one of us is our own alchemist. And when we work with these properties and we are guided in and we begin to understand how each one works, then that is what we are participating in. And it's also a practice, so it's really important. It's a very grounding thing. We're putting our hands in dirt and shit and everything else. And so we're really kind of humbling ourselves into the fabric of the world. I did read a thing very early on. There was a lot of stuff on YouTube, and there was this American guy, and he said, "I've been practicing biodynamics for 10 years now." He says, "Now I don't use the preps anymore because my world's just, I can see the angels." And I thought, yeah, but that you kind of let it go, and then your feet leave the floor, and then you begin to feel like you're one of them, and you're not. We're here to shovel shit. The more shit we shovel, the more soil we'll make. And the deep truth, another little anecdote was 2007, borrowed father-in-law's car, and I was driving somewhere, and there was he always had it on Radio 4, and there was two ladies, and they'd done their report was the basis of the loss of soil in the world. So they had gone round the world, and they'd looked at all the farming practices as best as they could, and had calculated this loss of 2% of soil per year. I think biodynamics is worth a practice because it's the other way. It adds 2% soil. So.
Thank you. Richard, how are you working with it? Are you with the angels? Yes.
Yes, definitely in the shoveling mode. I think, for me, the process starts with observation, and tuning in that process of observation. Our eyes are only receiving light. It's our brain that actually does the seeing and interpreting that. And we really need to wake up to how we observe. It's not a process of just seeing, that it's not just the light coming in. As human beings, we know that I can see an audience of human beings here. I don't see an audience of carbon and immaterial objects. So that's a clever interaction that goes on up here. But if you walk into a room, it's not about just seeing what is in front of you. It's observing the things that are going on your peripheral vision as well. But also, more than that, if you see a field in front of you, it's observing the plants, but then through a process Alex Podolinsky calls active perception, you can actually see the processes that are going on in the soil. And it's not possible, in any respect, I'm a scientist as well, soil scientist, to do that in a microscope, to dig up the soil. As soon as you dig it up, you disturb everything that's going on. So the best way to observe the processes in the soil is through the plants and how their roots are interacting with the soil. So that's an observational process, and so it's perceiving what's going on beyond what you can see in front of you. So that's, I would say, is the initial step is making your observation open. It's amazing how there's a lovely little YouTube video, if you want to see, called I think it's called Monkey Business, and it's a great tool trick, if you like, for observation, what you do and don't see. So do just look it up later. And so seeing, making sure you're aware of what you're seeing and the wholeness of it. Because if you're not observing what's going on, how can you interact? How can you make corrections, if you like? How can you really be in tune with what's going on in your farm? Everything we do on our farm is about health. Yeah, it's about creating healthy food, eventually, that we're going to pass on beyond our farm to people to hopefully make them healthy. So it's this idea that health is infectious. We have to have healthy soil, healthy plants, healthy animals, and it's a process. All those things, as Lady Eve Balfour said, the health of our soil, plant, animal, wildlife, human, and planet is one and indivisible. So you can't split one bit off and have a healthy bit here without it all being healthy together. And so that's really, this one and wholeness is really very important. And that's why, as a scientist, it's very difficult to separate any bits out and say, oh, yes, I can say this really is working on a scientific level. But that doesn't mean to say it's not working. And there are many observations that you make. And it's lovely when people come to the farm, and often when people have known the farm for a long time and make lovely observations and say, oh, yeah, you can really see your farm's cherished, is the word. Or Patrick a few years ago said, oh, just been around your farm, and there's a lovely velvet feel to the farm. And, those are things you can't write down in a scientific paper or in that way. Yet, there are analytical ways of looking at the processes going on the farm, and I've done that through a PhD. But so, first of all, it's observation, and then I think it's recognizing that we all have gut feelings. And I'm sure I would put money on the fact that everyone in this audience has gut feelings. And that's not just a feeling, it's also on a physical level. It's the fact that our gut is very connected to our brain, and if we feed it good food, food that's been alive properly, that will enhance our gut feeling. And so it's tuning into that gut feeling, I think, and making sure that we're connected with it, connecting observations with that gut feeling, that then we can react in a very positive way rather than ignoring it. And as we've heard, our best decisions, I think, and I'd agree with that, are from our gut feeling, our intuition that comes just naturally to us. And we all have that. But it's tuning into that perhaps in a better way, and that's what Patrick's enabled me to do, I think. And just one little point on the two things actually. I was going to talk about cows, and just so we had I hope that we are quite connected with our cows on the farm. That's the aim. We have a great deal of love for them, and I was showing some friends around the cows a couple of years ago now, and it was in the calving season, and we just walked into the shed, and one of the cows just kept on coming up to me. And I was talking to my friends and having a conversation, and we were talking about the cows, and she kept on coming over, and she'd wander around and show me her bottom and then walk off again. And eventually I thought, this is really odd. And actually, it turned out she was having difficulty calving, and calf couldn't come out, but it wasn't immediately obvious. And so I got all our friends to join in and help carve this cow who'd clearly wanted to try and communicate with me that she was having a problem and wanted some help. So that was just a sort of lovely example of how we can directly communicate with animals. And we've all got pets, and I'm sure we've all experienced those direct communications with our pets. And those who farm will have those stories about when their cows have come up to them and wanted something, not just to come and say hello, not to give them a nudge, but actually to have a communication. Just one more point on dreaming that Patrick made me think about. I've had some experiences where you wake up with perhaps answers you didn't know you had questions to. And I remember hearing Paul McCartney talking about his song Yesterday, which everyone will know. And he said, I just woke up one morning. It was soon after his mother had died. And it was in my head. I didn't have to think about it. I didn't write it. It was just there. He said, I don't like talking about it too much because I'm afraid that the magic will disappear.
So we have 20 minutes for questions. What we'll do is take perhaps 3 at a time and then come back and respond to them. So if you have any, wow, okay, let's take that corner first. Take 3 up there. Thank you. And if we could kind of keep our questions or comments to the essence, just so we can hear from as many of you as possible, that'd be wonderful.
Is there a time when each of you remember do you each remember the first time you felt the presence of the common wild tongue, or whatever that means to you?
Brilliant. Should we? Yes. If we just take a few, then we can answer. There's one right next to you there. Yeah.
I was curious about connecting with water and just trying to conceptually understand in my mind if the water's flowing. Are you connecting with the river structure, or I'm just trying to understand in my mind. It's moving, isn't it? So I'm just trying to figure that out in my mind. So, any thoughts on that? Thank you.
Do you want to ask and then pass a couple down?
Yeah, it was I guess you're going to have a lot of questions, but one of the things I just wanted to make a slight comment about with the concept of a wild tongue. One of the ideas that had been occurring to me recently is about stories, particularly stories about shape-shifting. So the idea of which we don't really have very much in our culture anymore, the Selkies, for instance, who could shed their skin, and it's sort of like a thing that we've lost in terms of our just storytelling, because those are examples of where humans basically take on the nature of wild animals, and they are embodying basically the wild, as it were. So, I mean, that's something maybe that will come up from the other questions that have been asked as well.
Yeah. And then there's 2 from you. Thank you.
I was going to ask about, so it's quite an innate thing if you've ever been around children in outdoors or in the wilderness, they have this already. And I was wondering, what is it that the panel thinks that makes you lose it, and why is it that so many people are trying to come back to it? And yeah.
Great, thank you. So if we take those, Bríd, can I go to you on the water one first?
Yeah. So I will. I'll answer the water one first from my so we are 70% water ourselves. Okay. So that's a big part of it. Something you meant. What's your name? Sorry. Hi, Tom. You said I'm trying to figure it out. I'm trying to think about it. From my perspective, our thinking mind is really powerful and it's wonderful and it does great things for us. It's not the place that will give us those kind of answers. If we limit ourselves to the mind, we're almost like cut off from other sensitivities. So it's like when the water passes by on the river, it's like if you imagine a wave in the ocean. A wave knows it's connected to the ocean, but all we see is an individual piece. But there's a lot more to the body of water than the wave. So as the river runs by, it too can give us the message. It's not one, oh, there goes the message. It's not like a leaf floating on the water and then it's gone by. The message or the essence of the communication will be through all of the water. Does that make sense? Please tell me if I'm not explaining it in a way that you understand.
I don't understand where the boundary is. Like, where does it stop?
Okay, so there is no boundary.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's a really, really good question, because the boundary is something we have created that creates limitless. That's a limitation in our humanness. Boundaries, borders. The trees over there don't realise that the trees over here are on somebody else's land, and they're chatting. They don't care that I own one part, you own another part. They're having a great time, you know. So the limits and the limitations that we put on our intuition, if you like, are from our minds. So there is no boundary, and the message will come once we are in the place to receive it. It's actually always there. The communication is always pulsing or emanating, maybe like it's always there. It only comes when we make ourselves available to receive it. Does that answer you, Tom? Okay.
Wonderful. Thank you, Bríd. Patrick, your first realisation that you were involved in the common wild tongue and why we lose it if we are born with it.
Sure. So as I shared, circumstantially, I grew up with this as normal, and being the youngest kid in the family, the issue was to get attention, and so you had to be able to, you know, pull a miracle or two off. Otherwise, you know, nobody paid attention and you weren't in the conversation. So, so I think following reading Richard Bach's Illusions, what I practiced was blowing holes in clouds or creating clouds in blue sky. Because that's something you could do, you know, without anybody looking until you could, you know, get it down, and then you could show off if you could do it like that. So, and certainly I think because it probably was literally, you know, I needed to have a few miracles under my belt as well. Probably it didn't really work until I stopped trying. You know, it was one of those, but definitely I remember that in early teens was I want to do this for work. I've got to be able to make it happen. So let's work on clouds. So that was probably the first reassuringly definitive. There really wasn't a cloud there, and there's no other cloud in the sky, and there is one now, and I'm pretty darn sure that was in response to my attention. So that one, in terms of how do we lose it, I think we simply lose it because our parents and our culture don't hold a space for that to be real. And as you so rightly said, kids just do this automatically, and they keep on doing it until they're told not to. And with the greatest shock and horror, my daughter's 21 now, and she went through kindergarten through end of school in a Steiner school, and aged 8, they were talking about plants, and Alia knows my work and loves my stories, and she was talking about plant consciousness, and her Steiner teacher told her that, of course, plants don't really have feelings. And for that to come out of a Steiner school to an 8-year-old, you know, if she hadn't had me in the background, that would have been it. But our reality, because, you know, it's what I get paid to do, so if there's food on the table, we're talking to plants. You know, it's kind of as easy as that. So she knew it was real, but that probably killed it for the whole of that Steiner class. Mm-hmm. So if there isn't support for that experience for a child, because they're looking obviously to orient to adult norms, because that's what they're absorbing, is how to be in the world. And if the adults don't think it's real, then even if they feel it, it either goes underground or they let go of it. And I honestly think that this is a deep, deep and primary source of most of the mental health issues that we have in our culture, is because our primary experience is not validated by the cultural narrative. And so really, in terms of what to do with kids, don't touch that dial. You know, just don't touch that dial. It's just working fine already. And just to hold the space of that's real, that's normal, and even as an adult, if you got, you know, the abuse of being told that that's not real, you know, at least don't pass that on. And it is difficult, I think, for adults to recover it, because it's then going against what our parents and our teachers and all the authority figures in our life, and probably therefore our friends, all think. And honestly, just, you know, in final response to this, doing a lot of the therapeutic work that I do, at least 50% of my clients, what they really actually want from me is for me to tell them that they're not mad, because they're having these experiences. And as far as they're aware, nobody else is. Actually, everybody's having these experiences. But there's this there's this common sanctioned silence. And, you know, whether I'm helpful or not in a material way, what most people really want to know is they haven't just gone absolutely stark raving bonkers, because their cows are talking to them and they can hear the trees and the weather's adapting itself to their desires and intentions. And yeah, they're talking to angels, or they're talking to nature spirits or elementals. And have I actually just lost the plot? That turns out is often what people really want to hear more than anything else. Yeah.
Great, thank you, Patrick. We've got 10 minutes, just under, so should we take some questions? There are a gazillion questions, and I wish we had longer. Can we take some of the online ones? Do we need the mic over there?
Quite relevant question to what you were just talking about. How about hearing and talking the wild tongue in our cities?
Okay, do you want to do another?
Yeah, I will do this
one. And we'll
as
take
well.
a couple more.
Bear with me, sorry. I have a question for all of them, please. Any advice for fighting for your land spiritually if it becomes threatened by, say, a massive public project? I hear the land telling me to fight. Those are the only two questions online.
Brilliant, thank you. And maybe a couple, this one here. Yeah, no,
so I often listen to books whilst I'm gardening, and I often think, am I doing the land a disservice by putting earphones in and not paying attention? I often take them out to listen to the bird song, but I often don't know if I'm doing the right thing.
Thank you. And one on the front. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think the language of the tongue, the wild tongue, is the language of the heart. I just feel so much gratitude for this space. And I'm thinking of all the people online, because you've mentioned this, from the British Isles perspective. I'm from France, I've worked internationally, and I felt that in international cooperation on food and farming, it's been very technocratic, and we've put this layer on top. And every, farming community I've met has that connection. And it's so important now to break that veil. Maybe not with words, but just to say, I now have huge hope that I see this space growing here, but also in many places where there's space for traditional wisdom to come back. And that just gives me so much respect. So just wanted to express my gratitude. Thank you.
Thank you. One more question, the gentleman halfway up.
Just want to go back to this boundary question and the different levels and frequencies that Patrick was talking about. Just being able to tune into the different. And can you ask the great consciousness what boundary or what you should be listening to? Because sometimes you need to go to the individual tomato plants, sometimes you need the River Thames, sometimes you need to speak to the Atlantic Ocean, the cosmos, the galaxy, what you can kind of, how you decide what level you're going to actually speak to. You're asking, I guess, the great consciousness. And so I guess, because the River Thames does have its own energy, and that's what I was just, have you got any more wisdom to share on where you go, how big you go, how small you go?
Should we take that one first? Patrick and Bríd, that sounds like another one for you. Well, basically we've got two, the boundary thing, and then there feels like there's something here about not listening. What are the consequences of not listening somehow? The question about the city feels like it comes into that as well. Should we deal with the boundary one first then? Patrick and Bríd, and if the other two of you want to comment as well, if you have any. Patrick, do you want to?
Yes. I think it's just the same as 3D. Who you're going to call? Do you need a plumber? Do you need an electrician? Do you need to change the plug? Do you need to speak to whoever's providing the service? Do you need to speak to whoever's the senior executive of the electrical company? Do you need to speak to a politician about how our electricity is provided, whether it's nuclear? So it's really just based on need and purpose. Do I need to speak to a mechanic? Can I fix this myself? Do I need to get a recall from whoever made the car in the first place? So I think you just same as human 3D. You just access the level of management that's responsible. And my dad had a lovely inner world, and he talked about the celestial civil service, and whatever the job was, there was a celestial civil servant whose job it was to manage that part of the universe, and so you just addressed yourself to that. So I'd say that, if I can, just everything that we can tangibly perceive has a precedent vibration, and if we could see the molecules in this and the atoms in it, they'd all be whizzing around. So everything that's physical has vibration. All vibration is consciousness. Vibration is consciousness. And so there's an animus in your car, there's an animus in your tractor, there's an animus of your house, there's an animus of the street, there's an animus of the pipes, of the electricity. So in this regard, everything is alive. Even the things that we consider to be inanimate, there is no inanimate. There's an animus within everything. So the city is alive. It's alive with the soul and spirit of the buildings, the soul and spirit of the tarmac, the soul and spirit of the utilities. That there is no inanimate. And so I'm sure that you all probably talk to your car, particularly if it's getting dodgy or in trouble. talk to your house, the spirit of the house, the spirit of the street, the spirit of the place. It doesn't matter whether it's growing asparagus or cows or people or houses. I run around and work on shopping malls. It's really important for a shopping mall to be a sacred place. It's where people gather. It's where they make choices about nutrition and budget and take care of their families. So it's really important to have a healthy soul and spirit in a supermarket. Really, literally, that's one of the most important things in the whole of our life, outside of a farmer, whatever we say about supermarkets politically. So just that in terms of, I think, yeah.
Thank you, Patrick. We have 2 minutes, so I'll quickly pop first to Bríd, then to Richard. Bríd, kind of thoughts on what happens if we don't listen?
If we don't listen...
or don't act, having listened.
Whichever. Yeah. If we don't listen, I didn't listen one time and I had a car crash. That was a pretty extreme not listening. So that's one example of not listening.
But if we don't listen to the land when it tries to communicate, will it try again?
The land and life and nature and one consciousness, which we're all part of, is always there. And it's the one consistent element or part of the universe. It's always there. It's always communicating. Absolutely 100%. Always. When we don't listen to the land, things do happen. But I'm not apportioning blame or criticism or anything like that. This is the beginning of a conversation. I'm sure we'll have many more conversations. And I feel like we've just begun, really. And I would, honestly, I'd stay for another 2 hours.
Yes.
But I think you had a really good question. And the woman with the earbuds and the nature, and I wouldn't feel guilty about what you're doing. That's the first thing. Because that's quite a low frequency, just as Patrick talked about frequencies. Feeling guilty about not being with the plants. Just observe and then maybe change something and see how that feels for yourself. So get people around you who can support you and try not to be afraid. And if you're afraid, feel the fear and do it anyway. I'm here, so my boots are shaking, but you can't see it. So it's just, I'll leave it there.
Thank you. Rock, last piece of advice in a nutshell.
Well, I was going to comment to the ladies to say, it's the same for all of us. We are all the centre of the experience. We're humans. The human experience is what we're having. It's through us that we observe the world, and it's how we feel about that. So, when you're in your book and you're kicking it along and you're loving it, that's the vibration you're putting in your garden. It may be that it's a distraction you don't hear. It may be that that's enough to help you find the voice, that you'll hear it above and beyond that. Maybe that's what you need. But yeah, we're the centre of it. Science is a human end. Everything's a human endeavour. That's what we're experiencing. We're the perpetrators. It's up to us to do it. This is how the world will change.
Yeah.
Yeah. When 2,000 years ago, we were given a light which came from the outside. It was an external. It was a support to get us here. That's change, and we will have a light, and it will be our responsibility to carry that in the future. So this is the training that we're going through now.
Thank you.
One other thing I will say
Absolutely.
is it does exist. It's Fulgia. Old English, Fulgia is shape-shifting. In Norse, it's Egi Einhammer or something like that. So these words exist in language, and it does exist, yes.
How do you spell it?
It's E-I-G-I-E-I-O, Fulgia, F-U-G-L-I-A. Fulgia.
What would the Irish be in that?
I don't know is the honest answer.
we have about -2 minutes. So.
In the programme?
Yes, for sure. And I'll give you some ideas afterwards about where to find us. But Richard, if I could come to you for -3
Yes, one
minutes.
just last bit of homework for everyone.
Yes, absolutely. Homework, that's where we like to end.
So, a book that's rather transfixed me recently, and in answer to your question about why children lose this, it's not children, it's our education, why we've all perhaps switched off from this. There's a wonderful book by Dr. Ian McGilchrist, who's an eminent doctor professor at Oxford University. The book's called The Master and His Emissary, The Making of the Modern World. And it's about how our left and our right hemispheres of our brains connect with each other, or don't. And it's absolutely fascinating book, and listening to him in conversation with Satish Kumar is actually really, really enlivening too. But that is really interesting how, our left hemisphere of our brain works in a very logical way, and our right is everything else. It's how you then interpret that, and how we've switched off, and we tend in the West to only use the logical side of our brain. And so by just reading that, you can then think about how we can reconnect with the right side of our brain. So it's a really good book. The Master and His Emissary.
Signs from outside, just to say that Patrick is back here at 11. We will... Okay, Patrick is coming back at 11. Thank you all for coming.